This is episode 66 of the 99 Forever podcast. I'm Eric Friesen, and my guest tonight is making his second appearance on the podcast. He's the host of the Tough Call podcast and a contributor for HeavyHockey.com, Josh Boulton. Josh, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Eric. Geez, episode 66, Mario Lemieux.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I might have to have you back for 99 as well, right? And it's always good to talk to another Gretzky fan again. And man, it's an exciting time in oil country right now. We're less than 4 weeks away from the start of the Stanley Cup playoffs. And as a minor hockey coach yourself, playoffs must be getting close to wrapping up for you. So before we get into any Oilers talk here, just how did the season go for your kids' teams?
We finally had our last tournament of the year last year. And it's always nice because it's the one that's it's a major one in the March break week. It's in my hometown of Cole Harbour called the Joel LaMontagne tournament. It's one of my favorite tournaments as a kid to take part in. And it's nice to go back as a coach and relive some of those moments with my own son being able to take part. Our team lost in the league final by one goal on home ice. It was a game we were probably expected to win. We had a great season. I think we only lost 3 games all year, and unfortunately that was one of them. So it was a rough way to end it for them, but it was a lot of fun to watch those kids develop. And they have a Sidney Crosby shootout was one of the main highlights of the year. Every team that enters that tournament on March break in Cole Harbour picks three players from their team to take part in a giant tournament-wide shootout. And my son got to take part in that. He was one of the 3 chosen. We had the players on our team vote. And it was something that I got to do when I was a kid, and it was something that my brother also got to do. So to see my son get that opportunity as well was pretty special.
No, that's really cool. And I think the last time you were on the show, did you mention that you grew up not too far from the house that Sidney Crosby grew up in too, right?
Yeah, it was one street over from it.
Wow, that's incredible. He lives so close to one of the all-time greats. And you coach your daughter's team too, right?
I'm an assistant coach with her team. Yeah,
Okay.
it's been with the way it works. I tend to try and alternate being head coach for one kid one year and the other the next. Just sort of works out that way. But my daughter played female hockey for the first time this year, so she was traveling quite a bit more because that's based out of a town about an hour away from where we live. So her home games were an hour away. So it was an interesting year like that. But to watch her play with other female players and see her come out of her shell a little bit, that was a lot of fun too.
Nice. And what are the ages that they play in?
So they were both under 13 this year. My son was second year and my daughter's first year.
Okay, that's awesome.
The
So,
old Pee-wee.
and for your son's team, is this the furthest that you mentioned they made it to the final? Was this the furthest that he's ever gone in his hockey career in terms of a playoff run?
They're pretty disappointed because they played in the championship game last year as well. They were not the favorites last year. They were kind of the upstart Cinderella team that ended up just playing the games of their lives on playoff weekend. Just happened to be so they made the final and they lost 5-4 in overtime. And then this year they lost 5-4 again. And
it's a tough break
for some of the second year players. That was the irony was not lost on them. And then of course in their spring season last year, they also lost their last game in overtime the same way. So they've had a bit of a rough stretch in their hockey. But the minor hockey is over, but spring season has started. My son's in spring hockey this year. My daughter's going to play a little bit of 3-on-3 this spring, and then we're going to cap it off with a trip to Vermont in July that we did last well. So hockey season just seems to be continuing.
It just extends every year, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And there's so many hockey camps in the summer now. It really seems like for the kids that have the chance to be professionals and from a young age show that they have an elite skill set, it almost has to be a year-round sport for them, doesn't it?
It's one of those things. As a development coach myself, I'm the development coordinator for our Modern Hockey Association. I teach the check-in clinics for Hockey Nova Scotia. I'm on the ice a lot with different levels. And the way I see it, my son didn't have any interest in that sort of thing He always, as soon as the hockey season was over, that was it. He didn't really want to be out in the garage doing any extra work. He just wanted to go to the rink and play his regular games and practices and be done with it. And of course, he was okay as a player. And this year, for whatever reason, at the end of last year, he decided he wanted to play spring hockey. He wanted to do extra work in the garage. And if that's his prerogative, that's great. But the way I heard it from one of the scouts that I listened to an interview of once, he basically put it that if your kid needs to be the one driving you to the rink, you can't be driving them to the rink. And all of a sudden, my son wants to drive me to the rink. He wants to do these extra things, and he really did develop and gain a lot of confidence this year. So obviously, the extra time and the work helped, but I don't necessarily encourage it just for the sake of doing it, because you also want your kid to want to be there, and you don't want to burn them out and get them to lose that passion for the game. In not forcing him, he's developed his own love for the game, and now he wants to do it all the time, and that's great. But if they don't want to, if you're only doing it for the sake of getting them to get better, they won't get better because they don't want to be.
No, that's a good point too. And Wayne Gretzky is a big proponent that kids should play multiple sports at least up until they get into high school. And if they have a sport that they're solely focused on, then they can concentrate on it. But he said that when he was a kid, when hockey season was done, he couldn't wait for baseball season to start because he loved baseball almost as much as he loved hockey. And he also didn't have the pressure um, to be the best, because when he played hockey, there were so many expectations on him, whereas he could just go out and have fun playing baseball. Do you agree that kids should play several different sports, at least until they reach an age where it's getting more competitive and then they have to be solely focused on one?
1,000%. 1,000%. I played multiple sports growing up. My kids play multiple sports, and you got to let them pick their passion. And if all the skills intertwine, and the schedules are usually pretty intense, but you can choose not to. You don't have to sign up for everything that has the word elite on it. That's what I always say. If you see the word elite, if you want to run a hockey school, call it elite. People will sign up for it. It's ridiculous how much people jump on that. Anything that they think will get their kids a step ahead, but really, your kids are going to develop when they develop. If you put them in other sports, they're going to develop the skills that they cross reference. They carry over to other sports, and eventually, if your kid is going to bloom, they will find a way to bloom in their own time. And that's the one thing I really feel about minor hockey is if you're identified as a kid early on as a 9, 10-year-old, that's one of the kids that always makes the team. Then generally it doesn't matter how you perform in the next 3 or 4 years. If you've been on the team, you kind of have that reputation. But there's so many kids out there that are late bloomers. They have other interests, and all of a sudden they just find their way in a sport. And I know we have a lot of kids often that are, uh, baseball season's wrapping up, or school soccer or things like that, and they're a little late getting started in their hockey season. And people in hockey have to realize that for some people, hockey is a second sport. We always look at it like all the other sports are secondary to
Because
hockey.
it's Canada, and hockey always has to be number
Like,
one. And if they play baseball or basketball or soccer, that's automatically the second sport.
right. So if they have like a provincial championship for their school soccer team and they're going to miss your preseason tournament, that shouldn't kick them off a team or something like that. That championship is every bit as important as your preseason hockey tournament. We have to understand that hockey hockey is maybe our lives, but it's not everyone's life. And we have to let people come and go the same way we want to be willing to have other sports let our hockey players come and go. And I think ultimately we'll all get to the places we want to be that way.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing about the age group that you're coaching now, I think you'll see it, or you might have already seen it this year, especially in the next couple of years, is the drastic difference in sizes between kids too. So when you talk about late bloomers, like there are going to be some kids who are a foot taller or maybe even 50 pounds heavier than some other kids just because they've hit a growth spurt sooner than some of the other kids playing on their team.
Absolutely. There's been a couple of kids here that have been like really superstars growing up, and you're just like, they hit 14 or 15 and they haven't hit that growth spurt yet, and you're just dying for them to grow so they can move on with their career, and it just doesn't happen for some of them. And my son, I come from a fairly short family, and for whatever reason, he's quite a bit taller than a lot of people his age now. I don't know what it was between last year and this year. He's grown quite a bit, and everyone's taken notice of his height, and it's been helpful for him. It's made him feel stronger and quicker for some reason. It has a psychological advantage to it. But you just don't expect some players to have that happen. You're absolutely right. Players they disappear for the summer and they play a different sport and they show up to the rink in the fall, and you have to be willing to judge them based on who they are now as opposed to what you thought they were at the end of the last season.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I only played 1 year of contact hockey when I was in grade 7. So that would have been my first year of Pee Wee. And then they restructured the divisions of Pee Wee Bantam, and midget. So I only played 1 year of Pee Wee, then actually 2 years of Bantam, and then 4 years of midget, actually, just because of the different ages for all the groups that they switched in the early 2000s. But that 1 year that I played of contact hockey, I was one of the tallest kids on the team, but I was also one of the lightest kids on the team because I was very skinny. So when you're a taller kid, you might look like you're one of the bigger kids on the team, but I could be knocked over by someone who was shorter than me just because they were heavier. So that's also another factor when you're talking about kids developing at different ages.
Yeah, I mean, my son has also decided he's going to train. He's doing push-ups and things, like he's trying to get stronger. He's put on a little bit of weight. My nephew, oh my God, when we were Canada Day, no matter how old they get, he played major band. I mean, he played the highest league you can play around here for under 15 as a rookie this year. And I tell you, they get the slip and slide out on Canada Day when we get together as a family. And when he took his shirt off, he was a man as opposed to, you know, the boy he was the year before. He just was a monster. These muscles and his shoulders were broad and all of a sudden, and he was just a completely different human being. And it's certainly helped him in the hockey, especially
Well, I
getting a
mean,
high level
you
contract.
you can see that from a 15-year-old who's just a regular minor hockey kid, and then you could have a guy like Ryan Nugent Hopkins, who when he was drafted at 18 years old was about 6 feet tall and 163 pounds. And there, like you said, there could be 15-year-olds that are even more developed than him, and he's a first overall pick in the NHL.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, anyway, man, that's great that your kids had a fun winter of hockey and that your son was able to make it to the final. So hopefully he'll cap it off with a championship next year. I also want to say congrats to you on your YouTube channel reaching 2,400 subscribers recently. And I saw that you've had 3 videos with over 10,000 views in the last 2 weeks, including one with 20,000 views. So it's great to see that your channel's popularity is continuing to rise. For anyone who hasn't checked out your videos before or listened to the episode we recorded back in November, can you just explain what you do on your YouTube channel?
Well, it's nice to have this opportunity because I kind of forgot I was talking to somebody about the recent AJ Greer cross check to Mike Hoffman, and of course, in my video, what I do is I have my own system, my own disciplinary standard. I have a suspension scale, and it's based on how I would run my own league if I were to run one. It's not necessarily based on what I think the current NHL should do or what I think they will do at all. It's based on what I would do if I was running my own league, the standards I would have, and what I would prioritize for player safety. Um, so I recommended a 6-game suspension for AJ Greer. And of course, to some people, they see a number like that and it just looks ridiculous. And I forget sometimes that people don't know what I'm doing. Like I'm getting a lot of new traffic and new followers and some new dialogue, some people coming onto the channel that aren't really familiar with what I do, and they just see 6 games and they're like, "What are you talking about? What are you trying to do here?" And Well, what I'm trying to do is really get people to take a step back and realize cross-checking to the face. Like, would hockey really be worse off if that didn't happen anymore? Like, like one game for that. Really, when you think about it, you could lay a proper body check, and all you did was take a wrong angle of approach and hit someone in the head accidentally, and you get 2 games, and you get 1 game
It
for
happened to Connor McDavid 4 years ago. He was suspended 2 games because there was I can't even remember who it was, but I think it was against Anaheim, and there was a player skating right towards him, and he just instinctively put up his 2 hands to defend himself as he was preparing to take a hit, and his 2 hands came up and caught the guy in the head, and McDavid gets a 2-game suspension for it. And I'm thinking this is a guy who he was just prepping to prepare himself to take a hit. And it was just like a last second instinct of getting his hands up. But because of that, he gets a 2-game suspension. A player with no history of dirty play. It just, and then a straight cross check to the face. You wonder how they only give 1 game for that when it was clearly there was a lot more like malice intent there.
it blows my mind. I mean, the puck wasn't even dropped. It's not part of a hockey play. There's nothing there that has any bearing on the impact of the flow of play there. So I don't know why they wouldn't go harder on that. And I'm just trying to get people to think about that. Why do we even have contact? I mean, you I always get shocked when you think about what happens in a game, when you really take a step back and realize the purpose is to shoot a black disc into a net. All
And the
the things.
purpose of hitting is to separate the opponent from the puck.
Exactly. That's
You're not
that's
hitting to take someone's head off. You're not hitting to injure the guy. You're hitting to get the puck back and transition to offense.
exactly. And that's what people are having a hard time with these days is they see a hit and some of them are even saying, well, it was within 3 seconds of when the puck was gone. Well, 3 seconds is a long time
That's
for you to decide
one,
to hit.
2, 3.
Like,
That's a lot of time.
like
Even when you're skating at full blast, that's a lot of time to change your course.
it's asinine. And I think the NHL actually only gives like zero point 0.6 seconds, which is a weird reference number. So Hockey USA in particular has taken on, and the IIHF has always had the idea that as soon as the puck's gone, you don't need to hit anymore. And I think the game is organically going that way because when I played and when you played, it was you have to finish your check at all costs. If you're a winger and you skate out to the D on your point in the defensive zone and you don't hit them, you've failed. But now people realize if you take those 3 or 4 extra strides, that's another 3 or 4 seconds where you've taken yourself out of the play. And the game just moves too fast now for you to recover. So it's not worth it to go out and finish that hit. So there's less hitting in the game, but it's more just, I think, from organic play. And now every time there is a hit, there's a giant scrum and the game stops anyway.
Yeah.
So it's really just inviting problems the way it's done. I'd love to see more open ice hitting, and I think I found a way to do that by making players just keep more focused on hockey. So my theme is put the hockey back in hitting because people are always saying I want hitting to come back to hockey. Well, I think if we put the hockey back in the hitting idea instead of just hitting for the sake of hitting, it would happen actually a lot more.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I want to ask you about 2 videos specifically that are Oilers related on your channel. The first being Jason Robertson throwing a knee out at Connor McDavid as he was trying to skate out of the zone with the puck, and the other being John Tavares chopping Vincent Desharnais across the hand. If you can think back to those 2 videos, what did you recommend for suspensions for those particular incidents?
Okay, starting with the Tavares Desharnais, um, I'm pretty sure I would have fined Desharnais. The cross, it's funny because the cross checks themselves that people claim, well, I shouldn't say people, I should say Leafs fans specifically because everyone else realizes they weren't that bad. So I don't care. I'm going to call Leafs fans out. They felt the cross checking and all that was too much, but really the first one was just a push. I as a forward who hates the idea that rules change in front of the net and players can have free will, even I would have looked at that going, oh, I'm glad he only decided to push me a little bit. That seems fair. Like he's allowed to do that. Um, then there was a little bit more of an aggressive cross check, but what I think did it was when he used his stick to push on the back of Tavares' leg just above the skate and try and kind of push his feet out from behind it. Like it's basically a slew foot with a stick. And I'm pretty sure that's what set Tavares off. That would have set me off too. So I would have actually fined him because I don't think the NHL does a good enough job of getting rid of dangerous trips. We just saw Jacob Chikrin go out because Hedman skated by and kind of clipped his leg. It happens a lot. Players accidentally on purpose do tight turns and they take the back of players' legs out. It happens all the time. And they always call slew foots dangerous trips, even blatant ones where you actually do physically kick the player's leg out and drive your elbow back into their stomach and throw them down. They always call them dangerous trips. They never call it a slew foot. They're so afraid to give a match penalty in this league and call a suspension what it is. So for me, I would have fined Desharnais for that little poke. But I would have suspended Tavares 8 games, I believe, because
8 games.
That was a violent cross slash targeted to the top of a glove of a player. You can do some real
Yeah,
damage.
it was a two-hand, and I'm not always the guy who's saying that you have to like stand up for yourself physically after something, but if Tavares is going to feel confident enough to chop a guy like Desharnais, who's significantly larger than him, then I think that you almost have to answer the bell a little bit after that, because that's vicious. I wouldn't have been shocked if Desharnais stepped out of the penalty box, and I'm not saying just completely drop the gloves and force him into a fight, but just kind of even give him a little shove and say like, hey, if you're going to do something like that again, it's going to be trouble for you.
I'm the mildest player you can get. It takes a lot to rile me up, and
But that was vicious.
I'm
It's
missing.
like,
But if he'd have done that to me, I would have let him know one way or another that was not okay.
yeah, exactly.
And the league has to step in here and do something about that.
Because if you're just going to let a superstar player like Tavares viciously slash a seventh defenseman, and what's the defenseman? I mean, if Desharnais would have jumped him, let's say, of course there would be 2 or 3 Leafs guys jumping in to pull him off of Tavares. Like you just know that's going to happen. That would be for any star player, and it wouldn't have been a fair fight either. But I think that in the heat of the moment, it probably escalated, and I do appreciate that Tavares did text Desharnais after and apologize. But it was still a pretty vicious chop by him. So I agree with you that there should have been at least some suspension instead of just a $5,000 fine, which is nothing. I mean, that doesn't. It's not like a lesson learned for Tavares, who makes $11 million a year.
Well, and this is one of those ones where it's kind of a good introduction to my system, because someone will tune in, hear 8 games, and turn the dial off because they're like, this guy's out to lunch. 8 games for a slash. But in my NHL or my league, it would be based on a standard already, a precedent set where slashing gets called consistently, even minor ones. So then when you have one like this, that would be an automatic major in my league. Like, people wouldn't even doubt that would be a major. It wouldn't be like a shock like it would be today. They'd already know that's the standard. And then for me, fines, like Tavares was fine. What does that do? Like you said, these little piddly fines, until the NHLPA gets their act together and allows the league to negotiate real punishments, this is partly on them. They protect the violence. They protect the offenders more than they protect the injured players.
They should be protecting their stars, especially. And you look at the way that other sports like the NBA and NFL protect the star players in those leagues. Meanwhile, you can have a player like Connor McDavid, who the other team is allowed to get away with consistent penalty after penalty. Just I won't even call them missed calls, ignored calls. And it's like, this is the best player in the league. This is your marquee player, and you're allowing bottom 6 forwards and third pairing defensemen to commit infractions on him unpunished. It makes no sense when he's supposed to be the face of the league.
It's crazy. And Sidney Crosby was the same way. I always get people commenting on my channel, oh, if that had been Sidney Crosby, it would have been an 8-game suspension, the crybaby. Only one player in league history has ever been suspended for an infraction against Sidney Crosby, and it was for 1 game for a cross-check to the head. That's it.
And just look at how LeBron James has been protected in the NBA and Tom Brady in the NFL. Can you imagine if McDavid had the same luxury where anything close to a penalty was called? The Oilers would be on the power play half the game.
And that's what people argue. But if they called all those little things, then the team would be
Well,
in the whole
just
game.
call the rule book.
Well, so what? If
Then
teams
stop
can't keep up,
committing penalties.
be better. That's the whole
Exactly,
word.
be
Be
better.
better.
And I think that I think some of the refs were like, oh well, they'll never come out and admit this, but we have to let them get away with something to even it up a little bit. It's like, well, why do you have to even it up? You have one of the all-time greats in his prime, and we're trying to even it up to make the playing field a little more fair. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it makes no sense. Let skill win. This league does not want skill to win. They want parity, and they go out of their way to get it. And they promote violence, and we'll see it in the playoffs. The rule book will be completely different, as it always is. A skilled team will get ahead in a series. The other team will try and bully their way back in, and they'll be allowed to do it.
It's the only sport that has, at least for the North American four major sports, it's the only sport that has a different rule book for its playoffs. I mean, it's not like the strike zone is smaller or expanded in the playoffs
Ooh, that's a good one.
in the baseball playoffs, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's like do we make certain concessions for football or basketball as well? I mean, I don't think so. A foul is still a foul in the NBA playoffs. So why is it just going back to the fact that they want hockey to be this really tough sport that it was in the 1970s, and you have to grind and battle for every inch out there?
here's what I don't get. I remember watching an Oilers Jets game earlier this year. The Oilers were up 5-0, I think, and Logan Stanley took a giant run at Derek Ryan, checked him from behind, and there was a scrum in front of the net and all that, and the announcers were basically just blatantly like calm and going, and this is what you expect in a 5-0 game.
I was at that game.
Well, okay, there you go. Could you imagine in, let's just say, a football game, 42-7, and it's early in the fourth quarter? Well, I'll just start to take runs at the wide receivers then, because that's what you do in a blowout. Like, no other sport would allow that.
No. I
I,
think it was 6-1 at the time in the third period, and it was a dangerous hit. And my friend who I was at the game with is a Jets fan. We were actually there for the Heavy Hockey Showdown that weekend, our charity hockey game,
right.
where we were raising money for the Sexual Assault Center of Edmonton. And the day before the game, we all went to the Oilers Jets game that night. And like I said, my buddy who had come to the game with me is a Jets fan, and even he said that that was a dangerous hit by Logan Stanley, and he didn't know how uh, there wasn't a major call there. And it's just like it's a blowout game. The refs just want this one to be over with. They don't want to have to call anything. Let's just keep the clock running. And here Stanley comes with a dangerous hit at a point in the game when the Jets are already out of it. It just made no sense.
And I can't remember what I would have given, but I would have suspended him for that hit. Like, I don't see why we would let that slide.
I mean, thankfully Derek wasn't injured there either, but I mean, still, what was he, 10 feet from the boards, and he just throws him in at an odd angle where, like you said, he goes shoulder first. It could have ended a lot worse than it did.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a terrible angle of approach. He didn't slow up at all. He was going to hit no matter where that puck went. He just wanted to hit someone, and the second it happened, it's like he wanted to throw a hit and get in a fight and do something, because he instantly dropped his gloves and looked around to see who was coming.
Yeah, but that's the game that Stanley plays to, and probably one of the only ways he can be effective out there.
Well, yeah.
Well, anyway, man, it's awesome that you're up to 2,400, and I'm sure you're going to hit 2,500 anytime soon here too. So, congrats on the growth of the channel.
Thank you very much. It's a lot of fun, and I get into a lot of good dialogue.
Oh, I completely would expect that. All right, let's get into some Oilers talk now. And like many episodes this winter, we have to start by talking about Connor McDavid, who scored his league-leading 60th goal of the season on Wednesday night as the Edmonton Oilers defeated the Arizona Coyotes 4-3 in the extra frame to extend their winning streak to 5 games. And McDavid didn't make Oilers fans wait long for him to add another notch to his already sublime season. He tallied his 59th goal of the season on the power play in the first period, where he banked the puck off the goalie's name bar and into the net from below the goal line. Then McDavid had back-to-back breakaways in overtime, thanks to two brilliant passes from Leon Draisaitl. And after hitting the post on his first attempt, McDavid went back to the same move again, outweighting Connor Ingram, and this time he placed the puck right under the crossbar to reach the 60-goal plateau in dramatic fashion. Josh, I don't think anyone could have scripted a better way for McDavid to score his 60th, could they?
Well, for some reason, these superstars, they just seem to have Hollywood in the veins. It just seems to happen. If like it's kind of like Wayne Gretzky plugging away and going, you know what, I'm going to break the point. If all things considered, it looks like I'm going to break the point record against the Oilers in Edmonton. And of course, it happened, right? Like that just it wouldn't happen against any other team. These superstars just seem to be able to write a script, and this was just another example of that. Just a awesome way to do it, an overtime winner, and just to have the place erupt like that. It was just brilliant. And of course, the number of games too was kind of important when you compare it to the race with Austin Matthews to 60. That was kind of cool for him to get that as well. So. Um,
Nice to have that one over him.
It is for sure. But guy, like we brought Tom Brady up earlier. There's a guy who won a bunch of Super Bowls, and then he switches teams, and then he just calls his buddies and say, "Hey, do you want to come to Tampa and win the Super Bowl with me? Sure, let's go do that." And they did. And so here's Connor McDavid just kind of chilling over a campfire in the summer, and he's just hanging out and they're talking, going, you could be a 50 goal scorer. And he's like, yeah, I probably could. Why not? Let's just do that this year. And then he just gets 60 for no reason. Like just, you know what? I feel like I can do it. Let's just do it to say I did it. And here we go. And of course he can just do it.
I mean, yeah, I always sort of thought that McDavid had another step to take as a goal scorer. I didn't think that he would reach this level as a sniper to be, at 60 goals through 72 games. But definitely, just like you said with Gretzky, McDavid has a flair for the dramatic. And going into overtime, I just got a sense that this game wasn't going to end without McDavid scoring his 60th. And I love that he had the confidence to go back to the exact same move on his second breakaway because he was so frustrated he didn't score the first time. And also, I don't think Ingram was expecting him to try the same shot again, so it probably caught him off guard a little bit. So McDavid became the fastest player to score 60 goals in a single season since Mario Lemieux in 1995-96. He also became the first Oiler to score 60 goals since Wayne Gretzky had 62 in 1986-87, which was a full decade before McDavid was even born. And the overtime winner was McDavid's 299th career NHL goal, passing Draisaitl for fifth on the Oilers' all-time goals list, and he could get his 300th tonight. So all in all, it had to be one of the most memorable nights of McDavid's 8-year NHL career. And with 10 games to play, McDavid has a real shot to score 70 this season. No one has scored 70 goals in one season since Alexander McGillney and Teemu Selanne in 1992-93, 30 years ago. Josh, do you think McDavid will score 10 goals in the final 10 games to reach the 70-goal mark?
I think he will. I really do. And what's amazing to me is he is doing this while still earning his second highest assist per game average for over the course of a season. Like he's not sacrificing passes or points to do it. He's just he's just being more selective about when to shoot the puck, being more aggressive. I think actually quietly Nugent Hopkins has kind of done the same thing. He's shooting more, and I think it's creating more. And to bring it back to kind of minor hockey, my son scored a lot more goals this year than he ever did. He was always a passer, and he kind of reminds me, like doesn't remind me of Connor McDavid watching him, but the process of his career, he's kind of just decided, you know what, I want to score more this year, and he's deciding to not pass it sometimes. And what it's done is it's created more opportunity because now a goalie can't commit either way. So it actually almost makes it easier to score. If you're a shooter and you start to pass more, they're still kind of committed to you shooting. But where he's always been a passer first and looking people off, when you start to add a shot element, I think that's a little more surprising than if you start with shoot first and then add pass later. So it's been nice to see the way he's created the goals. Like there's certain people that are just known goal scorers, and they have you see them get the same kind of goal over and over again, or they don't have the puck on their stick that long because they're the trigger man. You know what I mean? Whereas Connor McDavid, as always, because of his elite speed and his skill set, he's scoring goals of the type that we don't see, and he's been able to do it consistently. Like it's not a one-off highlight reel just because they're a skilled player and they happen to do something one game that looked really cool. He's just always pushing the boundary of how can I find ways to put this puck into the net. And the way he creates his chances, because he wasn't always a shooter, now you never know. Is he going to go to the net? Is he going to dish it off? And just he has so many different ways to get to the net that it's really hard to stop him, obviously. So I think he will get 70 because of the fact that you don't just have to lock into him on one spot in the power play, or you don't just have to streak. He doesn't streak down one wing all the time. He's just all over the map. You never know where that shot's going to come from.
Yeah, definitely. And uh, McDavid has always been known as a playmaker first and foremost. However, this season he's really developed a shooter's instinct, and he's increased his goal totals exponentially, and not just for his own personal gain either, but because he wants the Oilers to win. That he's a team first guy, and that's the only reason that he cares about scoring more goals is because he's helping his team. And we saw it right from the first game of the season where he scored a hat trick. And then he had 30 goals before Christmas, and he had 40 goals before the All-Star break, and he had 50 goals before March. And now he's within striking distance of 70 goals as we head into the final few weeks of the regular season. I mean, we already know he's going to win the Rocket Richard Trophy. McDavid scored 60 goals before anyone else in the league hit 50. And there's a few reasons that I think he'll score 70 this year. First off, he's on an absolute goal scoring tear right now with 18 goals in his last 15 games. So I don't see him slowing down right before the playoffs. If anything, he's going to elevate his game even more down the stretch. Secondly, you just know Draisaitl is going to be looking to set him up at every chance he gets to help him hit 70. And lastly, the Oilers have a fairly light schedule the rest of the way. They play Arizona, Anaheim, and San Jose twice each. So he could easily put up 5 or 6 goals in those 3 games. And if he can get a hat trick at some point, which incredibly he hasn't done since October, then it becomes even more likely that he scores 70.
Oh yeah, and yeah, definitely. He's been fairly consistent, and he's on a tear. And historically, he he just gets on heaters at the end of the year. Historically, that's been happening. So why would this be any different? And so if he's going to get X amount of points over the last bit of the season, like he always does, who's to say that half those won't be goals this year instead of the majority being assists like they have been in previous years? Based on the way his year's been going, he's going to get the points in one form or another. So why wouldn't they be goals?
Right. And it's like you said, his assists haven't dropped off at all. He's 2 assists away from setting a new career high in assists. Meanwhile, he's, like we said, already at 60 goals and pushing for 70. It's remarkable what this guy has done this year. And he already became the 5th player in NHL history to score 5 straight multi-goal games. And it's just, you almost like during that run, you were almost expecting him to score at least one or two every night because he was on just such a heater. And it's not just like he's shooting more either, but the shots are just, he's picking his spots, and he's always had a very accurate shot too. But it seems like he's added some velocity to his shot this year. And he does this great move where he likes to either cut to the middle and then to the outside and go 5-hole, or he'll shoot through traffic. We're just seeing him scoring it a lot of different ways than before, where he would just take the puck end to end, make a hard cut to the middle of the ice, and dangle the goalie. It's just it's not these thrilling rushes up the ice anymore. Well, I mean, he still does score that way, but that's not the way he's scoring the bulk of his goals. He has become one of the premier shooters in the league.
Yeah, he just finds ways to get the puck to the net from impossible scenarios, and it's just hard as a goalie. You never know when that's coming. His release, he holds the puck in the constant position, so you don't. It's not like he pulls back and then the goalie can get set because he knows the shot's coming. It's just on his stick, and then all of a sudden it's not on his stick anymore. and it's in the back of the net before you can even react.
And I believe that goal that he scored to hit 60 was at 2:30 a.m. Atlantic time. So I'm guessing you didn't get to celebrate until the next morning for that one.
I feel like I watched that the next morning. That was, yeah, that was, but it's still every bit as exciting because I don't know the result. I wake up and it's like, for all I know, I need to go through all my superstitions because I can still affect the outcome of the game because it hasn't happened. Right?
I like that you don't check your phone and that you watch it as if it's live. I worked a lot of evening shifts during the decade of darkness, so I would come home and watch games after work, and usually it was a pretty depressing way to end the night because those games ended with a loss a lot more often than they did a win. But
Yeah,
but at least now that I have a lot more evenings off, the Oilers are a better team, so that's makes it a lot more fun.
absolutely.
But I will ask you this though. If it does get to a point where the Oilers are in the Stanley Cup final, which could happen this June, will you stay up and watch those games live?
I feel like I would have to. Um,
Sacrifice a couple hours of sleep because you just have to see it as it's happening, right?
as as a kid, there was nothing better. You just wanted the overtimes to last forever. To say you were up till 3 watching it, like I watched the May Day goal, and I watched the other Buffalo goal where it was Dave Hannon. Like I watched all that, the Caps, Islanders. I remember these moments as a kid, staying up and watching these games.
Hmm.
And it's of course also then you didn't have the option of watching it the next day. Really, like our
Yeah, we
life.
didn't have a PVR at that time, right?
So I have a lot of VHS games and all that, but that's a lot of work.
It,
You put your time in. I still have these VHS tapes of old games and World Cups and stuff, and you just it's a lot of time and work. These mixtapes that we used to make, people don't realize put into them.
hey man,
So
we're kids of the '90s, right? Like we were the last generation of VHS tapes and going to video stores. So I'm glad that we got to experience that before before the invention of the internet and the rapid growth of streaming services.
I think the other part of it is it would be just too important. I wouldn't want to risk having the score ruined for me before I actually got to sit down and watch it. So I would want to experience that real time.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, if the Oilers were at 3 wins and they were going into a game where they could win the Stanley Cup tonight, just as one Oilers fan to another, I would want you to be able to see that live and to witness that moment.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and I would definitely want to see it. I
You might
remember
have.
uh,
Oh, sorry.
when
Go ahead. Go ahead.
when Cindy Crosby won the cup the first time. I remember sitting on the couch with my wife. This was pre-kids, and we were in our old house, and we just watched the game together. And when Crosby won the cup, we kind of were like both, we did it, like as if we had something. It was like we finally accomplished it together, like right. So that would absolutely be how I would feel if the Oilers won the cup. It would be something that I would be part of for sure, and I would want to be there in the moment to live that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was alive for one Oilers Cup, but I was a year and a half old when it happened. So even though I can say I was around for one, couldn't really appreciate it at that age. So I would like to be able to see an Oilers Stanley Cup when I'm old enough to be a fan and know what's going on. So I mean, that would be just a dream. That's my ultimate sports dream is to see the Edmonton Oilers win a Stanley Cup in my lifetime, and they've never been closer to making that happen than they are right now. Save for maybe 2006 where they were one game away. But just going back to McDavid now, even if he falls short of 70, I want to see him at least get to 66 goals because then he would pass Alex Ovechkin for the most single season goals in the salary cap era. He's already surpassed Nikita Kucherov for the most single season points in the salary cap era earlier this month. And it would be great to see him beat Ovechkin's goal scoring mark. And just to finish up on McDavid, he's 26 now and he's in his absolute prime. But do you think this will be his peak offensive season, or could we see McDavid raise the bar even higher next year?
I don't think this is his limit. I really don't. The way the game is going, we just saw Crosby. have a point per game season for his 18th in a row or something like that, wasn't it? Um, and
Yes. He's
and
one behind Wayne Gretzky for point per game seasons now.
like it's just unreal what he's been able to do. And McDavid is another. I think he's got another level on top of that. Like the way he generates chances. I don't think people always said, "Oh, he's so fast," and he can't maintain that for his career. But I think he's adapted pretty darn well to where he is right now. Like we said, he's finding different ways. He's not relying on one skill set. He's just super creative enough that he'll find a way to make things happen. Especially like he's not even old yet, like you said, right? It's not like he's starting to deteriorate, and
No,
he's
he's inexplicably getting better. And if you look at NHL like top offensive players, they usually peak somewhere between 23 and 27. But over McDavid's career, he's just continually gotten better year after year after year, and he's not slowing down at all as he gets into his mid to late 20s. We're seeing his offensive game take off even further to the point where now he's just 12 points away from 150 points. It's incredible. I mean, we're running out of superlatives to describe how great of a player and how great of a season he's having.
and we're back to an era where the Oilers are leading the league in goals again, goals for. Um, they're just they're
Back
not
to the 80s. They got the best player in the world. They got the best offensive team in the world. Now all they have to do is win the cup.
exactly right. And it's funny because it's a lot like the 80s because we're also like the highest goals against per game average or total goals against. I think we're like 11th in the league or something like that. Easily the worst of all the playoff teams. Florida, I think, is 10th. They're the only team that has a remote shot at the playoffs that has given up more goals against than us. But our goals for it doesn't matter. It's like the old Grant Fuhr days. As long as they can let in one less than the opponent, I think we got a shot in every game.
And we've heard a lot that the Oilers have enough elite skill that they can outscore their problems, but you want the team to still be better defensively as they get into the playoffs where they still have the offensive ability to put up 4 or 5 even 6 goals a night. But if you can keep the other team to 2 or less, you're going to win a lot of hockey games, and that's going to be the thing that will determine whether or not the Oilers go on a deep run or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they can turn that corner. I think once the playoffs start, things will bear down a little bit, and we'll have one way or the other. We'll get a bona fide number one goalie that we're going to ride each time, and we won't see maybe some of these one-off high scoring against games.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've always believed that McDavid would put up 150 points in a season eventually. However, I didn't envision a 70 goal season for him. I don't know if I thought any player would score 70 goals if Ovechkin couldn't do it. But he's currently on pace for 68 goals and 157 points in 82 games. We've already talked about the significance of eclipsing 65 goals, but 157 points would be the most single season points in NHL history by a player other than Wayne Gretzky and Mario Lemieux. And that's the stratosphere where McDavid now resides. He's already a top 10 player in the history of the game, in my opinion. But by the time his career is over, I believe he will widely be considered one of the 3 greatest forwards of all time alongside Gretzky and Lemieux. And as for this being his peak offensive season, I still think he can maintain this level for at least another 2 years. So I could see him getting 160 points next year or possibly even 164 to make it a full 2 points per game.
I I can't imagine a world where that doesn't happen. To be honest.
And just knowing I don't know how much Connor pays attention to the all-time greats that he's chasing or anything like that. But I think that if he got close to 160, if he was sitting at like 158, he'd say, well, yeah, I'm going to make sure that I get there now.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And when I compare him to some of the greats that you just don't realize where you are in the timeline of hockey eras. I guess when you look at what Crosby and Ovechkin were able to do in their time. And when you think back to like the days of Steve Yzerman and Dale Hawerchuk and guys like that that were able, the reason I bring them up is because these are players, particularly of that era, that were finding different ways to get their points. Like you have Gary Curry, who was a great scorer, but he was kind of just basing his goals off of feeds from Gretzky, right? He was just kind of a trigger guy, and Gretzky was finding different ways to get his points. Dale Hawerchuk and Steve Yzerman were kind of the creative guys, and even the likes of Joe Sakic, who got a lot of points, he kind of had a familiar shot. And I'm not saying he wasn't creative, but there was just something super dynamic about the other guys. I'm not certainly taking anything away from different players, but there's just certain one or two players of every era that stand out as guys that are just finding different, unique ways to play the game of hockey that are just impossible to defend. And I think we're seeing that in Connor McDavid, and it just happens to be at a time where the league, with the rules there and all that, they just haven't been able to figure him out. And it is kind of funny, like you said, he didn't used to draw a lot of penalties. And I think maybe this year he's finally getting a little bit of the respect that way from officials, maybe.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that either, where, there's this thing called veteran calls, where once you've been around long enough, the refs respect you enough to call a penalty. And just, I think that's another thing that's a problem with the game. But uh, I digress. It's good that I guess McDavid has now reached a point at least where the officials are giving him the benefit of the doubt more often than not. Even though by the time he was 21 years old, he'd already won 2 scoring titles. You think that would be enough to get the respect of the officials? But
It
yeah,
would. I
that's
think that.
just me talking.
Oh, for sure. I'm right there. There's no reason why a new player. Oh, and it's like, welcome to the show, kid. No, why? Like, what? Why?
Yeah.
Welcome him. He's just a hockey player like anyone else. He deserves to be protected like anyone else.
For sure. All right, let's move on to Mattias Ekholm now. And since making his Oilers debut on March 1st, Ekholm has 3 goals, 9 points, and a plus 15 rating in 11 games. But most importantly, the Oilers have a 9-2-0 record since Ekholm was acquired from the Nashville Predators prior to the trade deadline. Josh, what can you say about the impact that Ekholm has had on this team over the past month?
Well, it's kind of interesting to me. We talked in the group chat a little bit, and I'm definitely a Ken Holland fan more so than I'm not a fan. I
So
am
am
a,
I. I
but
think
he's
he, not to cut you off, but I think he takes a lot of flack for just people who don't like him. They'll look at 1 or 2 moves that he did, and if they don't like the Nurse contract or whatever it may be, and they've just made up their mind about the guy, and it doesn't matter if he makes a good deal or a good signing or not. They just don't want to give him credit for anything.
well, absolutely. And when you look at what people were saying last year were our problems, I don't believe those are problems anymore. And obviously Ekholm is now a big part of that. And I'm not a big fan of change for the sake of change, honest to God. But I do think that injecting that kind of freshness, that sort of beacon of hope, if you will, I suppose. Like if we'd have got any player, it probably would have been enough to sort of satisfy the demons for at least a game or two until we saw how it played out. But I really like the fact that he was the one we got, because there's just a presence about him that it's just soothing. My son is a Nashville fan, so I've watched him quite a bit before that. I never really thought about him as an option for us to get, because I don't really pay much attention to contracts and how it would have to happen. But he's one of the guys that it's like, oh yeah, he'd be awesome to have if that's feasible. Sure, why not? So he made it happen, and just like I said, just a presence to have that change and to have him with Bouchard. I tell you what, you talk about players that are affected by being traded. Uh, how much of an injection of life was the trade deadline for a player like him who wasn't traded? Because all of a sudden, the guy who's been kind of holding him back, as it were, the player he's supposed to mold into, is now gone, Tyson Berry. So all of a sudden, Bouchard is like, this is like a second coming for him. It's a chance, a new life, and to have Ekholm be his guide through that, uh, I don't think, to get Ekholm as a player himself, but the impact he's had on the players around him is like a double edged sword for the opposition, because all of a sudden they're playing better. He's making people around him better, and I think that's the most important thing he's done so far.
Oh, yeah, unquestionably. And while Tyson Berry was a key member of one of the best power play units in NHL history, trading him in a package deal looks like one of the best moves that Ken Holland has made as general manager of the Edmonton Oilers. And just right from his first game, you could see what a difference maker Ekholm was on the back end. He can disrupt the opposition with his reach or use his large frame to knock them off the puck along the boards. He always seems to be in the right place at the right time in his own zone. And despite being a team that thrives off the rush, the Oilers have needed to do a better job of transitioning the puck from defense to the forwards. But since Ekholm arrived in Edmonton, there's been noticeable improvement in this area. I think about the goal in Buffalo where he made just such a simple, smart play to just get the puck up ice to, I believe it was Evander Kane, who then just made a little touch pass to McDavid, who skated in and scored a goal. And just to have that sure hand in the defensive zone and just always make the right choice with the puck, never do anything flashy or risky, but just get the puck efficiently out of the zone. That's been a huge help too. And he always looks calm in his puck retrievals. And like I said, he makes a great first pass, and he's got a cannon for a slap shot too. I mean, just look at the goal that he scored to tie the game against San Jose the other night. He had all day to walk into that shot because there were two Sharks players who went right to McDavid, just leaving Ekholm wide open. And just two of his three goals so far, he's absolutely ripped a shot past a goaltender. He also brings a ton of experience to an Oilers team with several young, inexperienced defenders on it. I mean, he's played in 75 career playoff games, and he helped the Predators reach the 2017 Stanley Cup final. So, as far as trade deadline acquisitions go, he has to be one of the most effective ones around the league.
Yeah, he just makes everybody relax. It's like they can turn to him for emotional support in a way. I'm obviously not in the room. I'm not on the bench, but you can just see that players are playing a little bit bigger, a little bit more patient around him. They're not as afraid to do things with the puck. I do find that our Oilers defense traditionally at the start of this year, as soon as they hold on to the puck for more than 3 seconds, I know a turnover is about to happen. It's kind of funny because they say about be patient, but there's how many times, and I hate to do this to Nurse, but Nurse has a tendency to stand behind the net and kind of wait for the play to set up, and then he takes a step out, and by the time you wait that long, it's like, okay, something big's got to happen, or there was no point in me doing that. So he'll step out and he'll make this long pass to nobody, and I find a few of our D were doing that. The longer they hold on to the puck, the more I get nervous. It's like a goaltender being out of their net and holding on to the puck, and I just don't quite know where to put it, except it's our defense that do that. You shouldn't feel that way. And ever since Ekholm's been there, there's just been a quiet precision to those first passes. Like you said, it's not flashy, but it's not delayed. It's just intentionally efficient, I guess is the right word to put it. And I think it's made a lot of difference in the way the other defense, like I said, have reacted, and they're trying to do the same things. It's just been calming and soothing, and it's a lot less chaotic as a fan to watch.
And everyone's slotted accordingly now. Like, because Ekholm's arrived, it's taken almost a minute of ice time away from Nurse a game, which allows him to stay fresher for the third period. You're able to move Brett Kulak down to the third pairing. You can cut back Philip Broberg's minutes a little bit. And while I still think that Broberg is going to be an important player for this team going forward, he's still very young, and on a team that's trying to win a Stanley Cup this year, if you can have him as a number 7 guy as opposed to someone who has to be in the top 6 every night, I think that probably helps this team too. And when he does get a chance to play, that he can still bring it because we've seen him grow over the last couple months as well. Um, and I just think that pairing with Bouchard and Ekholm I mean, that's easily the Oilers' best puck-moving pairing on the back end now. You've got Ekholm, who we've already talked about, who can make the smart, simple pass, but then you've got Bouchard, who can deliver those long stretch passes that are right on the tape to send a guy in on a breakaway. He's done it for McDavid a couple times this year, and I hope that it's going to become a more regular thing in the years to come. I just want to go back to them for a second. You mentioned the positive impact that Ekholm's had on Bouchard. Did you expect that those two would play together and that it would really help Bouchard rediscover his form from last season?
I wasn't sure if they were going to play together, but I feel like I said, Bouchard was almost thrust into a spotlight with the departure of Barry. It was all of a sudden his chance to kind of put up or shut up. You know what I mean? It's like his time to be the guy a little bit, and it has obviously happened on the power play. And I feel like he was ready for some sort of confidence boost anyway. So the fact that he was put with Ekholm, I don't know if that was the plan all along when they got him or what, but I think been one of the best things for him because he's he was already under the gun a little bit to start stepping into that role, and I think he was probably pretty excited about that chance. But it would have been a little different if he'd been paired with somebody like, say, Cody Ceci or something. It would have been a lot more pressure to carry things, whereas Ekholm, I think, has allowed him to transition without that worry of things are going to be okay because I got Ekholm there.
Yeah. And so look, after Bouchard had 43 points as an unofficial rookie in 2021-22, I thought he was a lock to put up 50 points this season and possibly even 60. But he struggled at both ends of the ice for much of this season. And I think a big reason for that was because he missed playing with a future Hall of Famer like Duncan Keith. But since Ekholm arrived, Bouchard has 9 points in 11 games, which is close to a point per game pace, and that's even more than we expect from him as an offensive defenseman. But he's also only been on the ice for 2 even strength goals against during that span, which is quite impressive considering the tough competition the Oilers have played this month. The thing is, though, when it comes to Barry, yes, he was a very popular player in the room. Yes, he was an important part of the power play, but the Oilers made the right choice going with the younger player with the higher upside, also a player that the organization drafted and developed themselves. And with Barry headed to Nashville, that was the opportunity for Bouchard to finally step in and become the full-time power play quarterback, which is the role he was expected to fulfill when the Oilers drafted him 5 years ago. So Ekholm's arrival has both directly and indirectly put Bouchard in a better position to succeed, in my opinion.
Exactly. It's allowed him to transition into a higher role without the pressure of being the one that has to carry the shift when he's out there because he's got a strong backer. I think you're right about the Duncan Keith situation. And when I talked about goals against for the Oilers, they actually in the 11 games since Ekholm's been there have actually given up slightly above their average goals per game. I think their average goals per game is just over 3 against. And since Ekholm's been here, I think it's like 3.45 or something like that. But they've also held the opposition to 2 goals or less 4 times of those 11, and 3 of those are against the Leafs, the Bruins, and the Dallas Stars. So some tough competition there. There's
And
been
we've seen that from this team all year where they get up to play the best teams in the league. One of their issues has been playing down to their competition. We've seen them also lose to some bottom 5 teams in the league. So if they can sort of get that sorted out and take care of the games that they're supposed to win, then this team will be set up. But as we get going into the playoffs, at least it's encouraging that we know that the Oilers can beat the good teams in this league.
well, people, it's almost a positive for us because we're going to be playing. I don't care what people want to say about the Eastern Conference. We've talked a lot in our little group about how tough the Pacific Division is because all the teams are so close and none of them will stop winning. So, so it's been really hard. The Oilers, as great as they've been, have had a hard time making up points in the standings because the other teams just refuse to lose.
Absolutely. I mean, it's hard to it's hard to gain points when you look at the out of town scoreboard and oh, you won tonight, but the team you're chasing also won, and it just happens night after night after night. So it just feels like all you're doing is keeping pace, really.
Exactly. Um, and I think, and the Pacific Division, the points are so close to each other that it's nice to know that the Oilers are able to find a way to get on top of teams that are close to them or above them, even if they kind of stumble a little bit against a lesser competition, because we know that as long as they can keep pace with whoever they're playing with on any given night, that's all that matters, right? It's not like they're getting blown away by the lower seeds. They're still beating them. It just happens to be one goal games. So we can win one goal games all the way to the Stanley Cup. It doesn't matter how you do it as long as you do it.
Definitely. All right, let's talk about Stuart Skinner now. Skinner recorded his 29th career win in a 6-4 victory over the Seattle Kraken last Saturday, breaking Grant Fuhr's franchise record for the most wins by a rookie goalie. Skinner was also the first Oilers rookie goalie to be named to the NHL All-Star game since Fuhr in 1981-82 earlier this year. And while Skinner started the season as the backup, he's undoubtedly the Oilers' number one goalie now and will be in net for game one of the playoffs. Josh, many Oilers fans viewed Skinner as the goalie of the future for this team. But after signing Jack Campbell to a 5-year contract in the offseason, are you surprised that Skinner has taken the crease from him this soon?
I'm not surprised because of Stuart Skinner's capabilities. I'm surprised that Jack Campbell hasn't found his game quite yet. That's what I'm more surprised about. But as far as Stuart Skinner goes, I'm I'm not really surprised that he's been able to jump into this scenario. I think it would have been a little different had we not signed Jack Campbell and gone with Stuart Skinner, and he all of a sudden was supposed to be the guy. I think again, it's another situation like we just talked about with Bouchard, where because he hasn't been able been required to be the guy, it just happens to work out that he has. He's been obviously a tremendous relief for us as Campbell's had his struggles. But I think if we had depended on that right from the get go, that might have been a different story. I don't know. I can't say one way or the other. Um, but I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised he was able to pull things together when we needed it and put together this kind of a year, because he definitely is going to be the goalie of the future. We just didn't know at what point, how far into the future we need to go before he got there.
Right. And another thing that some Oilers fans like to criticize Ken Holland for is for making that 5-year pact with Campbell. But look, this was a team that was looking for stability in net. Mike Smith was going on LTI for the year, so he wasn't going to play. Koskinen had signed in Europe, so the Oilers were going to have to upgrade the goaltending position no matter what. They saw, I think, enough from Skinner last season that they felt comfortable that he could be the backup this year. But for a team that was trying to win a Stanley Cup, you couldn't go into the season with a guy that's played 14 NHL games and bank on him to be the starter. So Holland had to address the goaltending in the summer. You could say that maybe he only needed to sign a goalie for 3 years, and maybe they could have tried to find someone else as more of a short-term option instead of giving Campbell a 5-year deal. But he was the best goalie on the market. He and Darcy Kemper in Washington grabbed Kemper first. So Campbell was basically the guy that was out there, the number one goalie on the free agent market. And the Oilers grabbed him for $5 million a year. And I thought maybe he would hold that position for 3 years, and then we would see Skinner by that point sort of ascend up and take the starter's job, and you'd have Campbell as the backup for the final 2 years of the deal. But the fact that it's happened this soon, and that's not to say that they couldn't go back next year. Like if Campbell has a resurgence in his second year in Edmonton, which I hope he does. I hope he does find his game. It's too late for him to get his game on track now. All he's doing for the rest of this season is giving Skinner rest when Skinner needs it. But I do hope that he rebounds next year. But for Skinner to show this early on that he is capable of being an NHL goaltender. I mean, when he started the season, he was 23. He's turned 24 since. But that just gives me a lot of hope for the future. And also Skinner signed a 3-year extension in December for 2.6 million per year. So when you look at them as a collective, that they're going to make 7.6 million as a tandem for the next 3 years, you can live with that as a total price point for your two goalies. You could argue that it should be maybe flipped, that one guy is making 5 million and the other guy is making 2.6, but the fact that that's the total cost for your goalies, I think it's a lot easier to stomach.
Having Jack Campbell for 5 years is not a big problem, in my opinion. You might, like you said, scoff at the numbers a little bit, but when you do what you just did and say that's your goalie total, that's in line with what you'd want as far as the percentage of your cap for your goalies. And like you said, Jack Campbell, it's not like he's dead to us, you know.
And if the Oilers win the Stanley Cup this year, nothing else matters, right? Like some people talk about, oh, the Zach Hyman contract could age badly, or even before this season when Nugent Hopkins is having a career year, some people thought that contract would age badly as he gets into his mid to late 30s. But realistically, the Oilers don't care about what's those contracts are going to look like in year 6 and year 7, and the salary cap will have gone up by then anyway, so it's not going to be as big of a hit as some may think. But they care about the next 2 to 3 years when they're in this window with McDavid and Draisaitl at the height of their powers. And if you had to sign some guys a year or two longer than you probably would have liked to surround McDavid and Draisaitl with as much talent as you can right now, then it's well worth it. That's the most important thing for this. And when you look at how important Skinner has been to the Oilers this season, it's hard to imagine where they would be without him. And other than just one good month in January, it's been a really tough first year in Edmonton for Jack Campbell right from opening night. But Skinner stole the starter's job early on and never looked back. I think he's also inspired a lot of confidence in this group where they can go out and play to their capabilities and feel confident that Skinner is going to make the next save. I'd also say that other than McDavid and Draisaitl, Skinner has probably been this team's most valuable player this season. Josh, looking at some of the candidates for the Calder Trophy, do you think that Skinner has a realistic chance to be a candidate for Rookie of the Year?
Honestly, it's the way they define these trophies. Is it who had the best season statistically? Is it what kind of rookie is the MVP of their team? If you're looking at importance to their team and being thrust into a role of significant importance compared to maybe other rookies, there's Stuart Skinner has to be up there among the very top in terms of importance and relevance to where their teams are this season. So I don't know statistically how he ranks up against other goaltenders or, comparatively other rookies, what kind of years they're having. All I can say from a standpoint of an Oilers fan is, like you said, we wouldn't be where we are without him.
Right.
And think about the importance of his role on this team. I don't think there's any rookie that's stepped into a more important role.
And he doesn't have a player like a Connor McDavid or a Austin Matthews standing in front of him who could take the Calder Trophy. I mean, Matty Beniers leads all rookies in scoring with 50 points. Mason McTavish has 41. Mattias Ekholm for Arizona, surprisingly, who's come out of nowhere, it seems, has 40. Those are the top 3 scoring rookies in the league. And it's not like they're having world beater seasons. So Skinner should definitely be in the mix with them at least. The only other rookie goalie who would be right up there with him would be Logan Thompson in Vegas, who's injured now. But I just think when you see how important Skinner has been to this Oilers team, and the fact that we're talking about him, and I mean, you could argue that any team's goaltender is one of their most valuable players. But when you look at how important he's been to the Oilers' success this year, I don't know how he's not at least a Final 3 candidate for the Calder.
He has to be recognized in some way. I mean, when you look at Neil getting a statue in Ottawa, there's different ways to measure the importance to a franchise and the value you bring to a team. That's for sure, right? If you're going to look at it that way, like I said, I don't know if there's any rookie that's been more important to their team in terms of the role they play in their rookie season than Stuart Skinner.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I just want to talk about the standings to finish up here. So as of right now, the Oilers are in third in the Pacific Division with 90 points, 4 points back of LA, 6 points back of Vegas. They also play both of those teams 2 times each before the end of the season, one in Edmonton and one on the road. So the Oilers do control their own fate to a certain extent. Looking at it with 10 games to go, where do you think the Oilers will finish in the Pacific Division?
I think they're going to finish second, same as last year. Um, I, I, they've done all they can to gain ground. It's all they could do to get themselves jumped out of that last wild card spot and into a divisional spot. And I think with the fact that they have these interdivisional games to play coming up, I think that's what's going to put them into second. I don't think it's going to be quite enough to pole vault them into first place. I did a video for Heavy Hockey, as I did 2 years ago, and I did it again this year. It's called The Oilers' Path to the Playoffs, and I think there was like 38 games left in the season when I did it, and I kind of picked a few relevant games and how they were going to do in the division, which they're doing very well against divisional opponents so far in terms of those games. I think they're 5-0 in divisional games since I did that video, and they have a lot coming up. And so I allowed them to go in terms of, and I did divisional games, and then there was like 3 or 4 in the schedule that I picked out as kind of important games, and they've played all 4 of those games if you watch the video, and they went 3 out of 4 in those games, and they're currently 5-0 against their division. So in non-divisional games and non-ones that I mentioned, I think their record could be 8-10-2 in the remaining games, and currently they're on a tear. Like they have, I think they're well on the way to that. I think they're like 7-5-5 because in games where I thought they might lose, they've been able to squeak out an OT point here or there. So it's been really good. They've been trending higher than I predicted they would trend to make the playoffs. And yet they still, I don't think, because of the way the Pacific teams are playing, I still don't think they're going to be able to make that jump completely to the top. I think the other teams are just playing too well right now. But there is something to be said for being the hottest team going into the playoffs, even if their streak isn't quite enough to put them to the top of their division. I think it will put them. I think the way they've played is enough to make them the favorite coming out of that division.
Oh yeah, and I was hoping that the Oilers would get their first divisional banner in over 3 decades this year, but they had a bit of a slow start, and it's been great that they fought back in the second half. I tweeted the other day that the Oilers are tied for the most standings points in the league since January 11th, and that was the game after they lost to LA. If you remember, they were embarrassed on the road. The Oilers scored late to make it a little closer. It finished, I think, 6-4, but they allowed 4 power play goals that night. LA just controlled the play all game. And just from there, the Oilers got their season back on the rails. And it was actually Jack Campbell in net, to give him a little bit of credit, who was sort of leading that charge in goal while Skinner flew back to Edmonton for the birth of his first child. And from there, the Oilers just went on a run. They won 6 straight games. They had 11 straight games with at least a point, 17 straight games where they only had 1 regulation loss. And that allowed them to climb up from being this in the second wild card spot to being a top 3 team in the Pacific. And now, like I said, they're just 4 points behind LA, 6 points behind Vegas. If they take care of those 4 games against those teams, then they really do have a chance still to win the division. But it's going to be tough because Vegas is still, got their games ahead of them too. And even if the Oilers win those 2, they would have to have a better finish to the season than Vegas would. But I think that they're going to play LA in the first round. And that's a team that's been a thorn in their side this season. They've lost both games to LA after beating them in the first round of the playoffs last year. And as for Vegas, the first of those 2 meetings is actually just about 10 minutes away here as we get close to puck drop on Hockey Night in Canada. So by the time this podcast is posted, we'll know who won that game. But I'll get a prediction from you, Josh. How do the Oilers do against Vegas tonight?
I I don't know. It's one of those ones. I had them when I made that video with 38 games left. They had 3 games left against Vegas and 2 against the Kings, and I predicted they would go 2-1 against the Vegas Golden Knights in their final 3 games against them. And they won the first one, so they do have a loss to give against Vegas according to my point standings here. So I wouldn't be surprised if it was tonight. I don't know. It's it's just one of those ones where there's just such an expectation for this game that I feel like it would be super exciting if they got the game against them. And I think I've got my hopes up too high, so that usually means that they're going to lose the game. And I feel like that'll be partly my fault if that happens. So I kind of want to just say that they're going to lose, just so I can have my heart set on that. And then if they happen to win, I'll feel better about it.
Well, I'm hoping that they keep their streak going and they win their third straight against Vegas. The last time they played was on my birthday back on January 14th, and the Oilers won in Vegas. So that it was a good birthday present. I'm hoping that I can get another win tonight from the Oilers. And I just want to say thanks again for joining me on the podcast tonight. It's always great to talk to you, Josh. Before we call it a night, where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter at Tough Call Pod. I'm on TikTok now, of all things, at Tough Call Pod as well. And I'm on Instagram at Tough Call. And of course, most important thing you can do to help me out is to subscribe to my YouTube channel, which also happens to be called Tough Call. So I'm pretty easy to find. If you just Google Tough Call, I'm sure you'll find me in all those places. But if you want to do one thing for me, go to YouTube, find Tough Call, and subscribe to that page.
All right, so everybody go give Josh a follow. Let's get him up to 2,500 followers by the next time he's on the show. Josh, once again, thanks again, and look forward to doing this again, perhaps even in the playoffs.
Oh, absolutely. I'll be up for it. I love this show, and I appreciate all that you do.
Thanks, man. Have a good one.
All right, you too.
All right, so for Josh Boulton, I'm Eric Friesen. This has been the 99 Forever podcast. We're out.